October 15th, 1935, New York City. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Inside a private suite high above the city streets, the air was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken tension. 12 men sat around a long table, some relaxed, some restless, all armed. These weren't politicians or businessmen, but they controlled more money, more violence, and more influence than most people in America could imagine. This was the Commission, the governing body of organized crime. And this was its most dangerous meeting yet. No one was laughing. No one was talking over each other. Even for men who lived surrounded by death, something about this night felt different. Heavy. Final. The kind of moment where one bad decision could change everything. Lucky Luciano sat near the head of the table. Not as a boss, because there was no boss anymore. That was the whole point of the Commission. Equal power. Equal votes. Rules instead of blood feuds. Around him sat the most powerful underworld figures in the country, men who had clawed their way to the top through violence and betrayal. And at the far end of the room, sitting slightly apart from the rest, was Dutch Schultz. Dutch didn't blend in. He never had. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with barely controlled rage. Everyone in the room could feel it. Dutch wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to debate. He was here because his back was against the wall. The meeting was called for one reason. A prosecutor named Thomas Dewey, a man who couldn't be bribed, a man who couldn't be scared, a man who was building cases that threatened to put half the men in this room behind bars. For most of them, Dewey was a problem. For Dutch Schultz, he was a death sentence. The room listened as Dutch spoke, his voice sharp and impatient. Dewey had witnesses, ledgers, evidence, enough to bury him forever. Dutch didn't talk about defense strategies or lawyers. He talked about solutions. Simple ones. Final ones. "We kill him," Dutch said. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Killing a prosecutor wasn't just murder. It was suicide. It meant federal attention, national attention. The kind of pressure that crushed entire organizations. Everyone in that room knew it. Lucky leaned forward, calm, controlled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Dutch. He explained. Killing Dewey would bring heat no one could survive. It would destroy everything they'd built. This was the one line that couldn't be crossed. When the vote was called, the outcome was clear. One hand raised in favor, 11 against. Dutch lost. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Dutch stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly across the floor. His face turned red, veins visible in his neck. This wasn't just rejection. This was humiliation. To Dutch Schultz, a man who had built his empire through fear, being told no was unforgivable. He cursed the Commission, cursed the idea of rules, called Lucky soft, weak, accused him of forgetting where he came from. The tension snapped tight. Men shifted in their seats. Hands moved closer to jackets. Then, Dutch's hand disappeared inside his coat. Every man in the room froze. Dutch pulled out a .45 automatic, cocked it, and aimed it directly at Lucky Luciano's head. 3 feet away, point blank. No hesitation. No shaking. Just raw intent. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with understanding. If that trigger was pulled, the Commission would die with Lucky. The rules would die. The future would die. Lucky didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't stand. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at Dutch Schultz. And in that moment, with a gun aimed at his face and 11 witnesses watching history hold its breath, Lucky Luciano prepared to say the words that would change the Mafia forever. Dutch Schultz had never been good at being told what to do. Long before the Commission existed, before rules and votes and meetings in hotel suites, Dutch had built his power the old way, with fear, with violence, with an understanding that in his world, respect didn't come from discussion. It came from what people believed you were capable of doing if crossed. By 1935, Dutch Schultz was one of the most feared men in New York. He ran a massive numbers racket out of Harlem, pulled in millions of dollars, and had a reputation for explosive, unpredictable violence. He didn't delegate punishment, he delivered it himself. Beatings, executions, torture. Over the years, dozens of bodies had been linked to him, directly or indirectly. Dutch didn't just rule his territory, he terrorized it. But fear has limits. And in 1935, Dutch had run into something fear couldn't fix. Thomas Dewey. Dewey wasn't like the prosecutors Dutch had dealt with before. He couldn't be bribed. He couldn't be intimidated. He didn't take meetings in back rooms or answer to political favors. He built cases quietly, methodically, following money trails and flipping witnesses one by one. And worst of all for Dutch, Dewey had focused his attention directly on him. Ledgers had been seized, accountants had talked, witnesses were lining up. Dewey wasn't guessing, he was preparing, and Dutch knew exactly what that meant. Prison, not a short sentence, not a slap on the wrist, 20 years or more. Enough time for a man like Dutch Schultz to rot, forgotten, or die behind bars. To Dutch, prison wasn't punishment. It was execution by slow decay. So he did what he had always done when faced with a threat. He decided to eliminate it. In Dutch's mind, the solution was simple. Kill Dewey. Make it look random. A mugging, a robbery gone wrong. One bullet, one dead prosecutor, and the problem disappears. That's how things used to work. That's how bosses survived. But the world had changed, and Dutch refused to accept it. The commission represented everything he hated. Talking instead of acting, voting instead of ordering, rules instead of instinct. To Dutch, it wasn't leadership. It was weakness dressed up as progress. He believed real power came from dominance, not consensus, from fear, not structure. That's why he called the emergency meeting. Not because he respected the commission's authority, but because he wanted them complicit. If Dewey died with the commission's approval, no one could turn on him later. If things went wrong, they'd all go down together. But when the vote failed, something inside Dutch snapped. It wasn't just that they said no, it was who said no. Lucky Luciano, a man Dutch still saw as a former street punk who talked too much and thought too far ahead. A man who believed rules could replace violence. A man who represented the future Dutch couldn't control. In that moment, Dutch realized something terrifying. He wasn't just losing protection, he was losing relevance. The system was moving forward without him, and it didn't care how many people he'd killed to get where he was. For a man like Dutch Schultz, that realization was unbearable. And when men like Dutch feel cornered, they don't adapt. They explode. Dutch Schultz had never believed in rules. Long before the commission ever existed, before votes and meetings and smoke-filled hotel rooms, Dutch had already decided how power worked. You took it, you defended it with violence, and you never let anyone tell you what you could or couldn't do. That belief had made him rich, feared, and dangerously unstable. By the mid-1930s, Dutch Schultz controlled one of the largest criminal operations in New York City. His numbers racket in Harlem generated millions of dollars, and his reputation was built on brutality. Dutch didn't hide behind soldiers. He didn't give quiet orders and wait for reports. When someone crossed him, he handled it personally. Beatings, executions, public displays meant to remind everyone watching exactly who he was. Fear was his currency. But in 1935, Dutch ran into something fear couldn't solve. Thomas Dewey. Dewey was a different kind of enemy. Young, ambitious, incorruptible. He didn't take bribes, he didn't back down after threats, and he didn't rush cases. He built them slowly, carefully, brick by brick. While other prosecutors made noise, Dewey followed money. He flipped accountants. He collected ledgers. He turned insiders into witnesses. And Dutch Schultz was his primary target. By the time the commission meeting was called, Dutch knew the truth. Dewey had enough evidence to bury him. Not for a year, not for 5, for decades, 20 years or more. For a man like Dutch, prison wasn't just punishment. It was a slow death. He had seen bosses go in powerful and come out broken, forgotten, or not come out at all. Dutch refused to let that be his ending. In his mind, the solution was obvious. You kill the problem. One bullet, one dead prosecutor. The case collapses, witnesses disappear, life goes back to normal. That was how the old world worked. And Dutch believed the old world still applied. What he didn't understand was that the rules had already changed. The commission was Lucky Luciano's creation, and it represented everything Dutch despised. No boss of bosses, no absolute authority, decisions made through discussion instead of violence. To Dutch, it felt like weakness, masquerading as intelligence. Democracy had no place in his world. Bosses weren't elected. They were feared. Dutch didn't call the commission meeting to ask permission. He called it to force agreement. He wanted the others tied to his decision. If Dewey died and the government came down hard, everyone would be equally guilty. No one could sacrifice him to save themselves. But when the vote went against him, something inside Dutch cracked. It wasn't just rejection. It was humiliation. 11 men telling him he was wrong. 11 men choosing rules over survival, at least in his eyes. And worse than that, it was Lucky Luciano delivering the verdict. The man Dutch still viewed as an upstart, a thinker, a planner, someone who believed systems were stronger than individuals. Dutch saw that moment for what it was, the future choosing someone else. And Dutch Schultz was not a man who accepted the future quietly. For a man built on fear and control, losing authority felt worse than death. And when men like Dutch Schultz feel cornered, they don't compromise. They don't adapt. They lash out. And that is how a discussion about rules turned into the most dangerous moment in Mafia history. The commission meeting was supposed to be about order. That was the promise Lucky Luciano had sold to the underworld after years of bloodshed. Rules instead of chaos. Discussion instead of gunfire. But as the smoke thickened in the Waldorf suite, it became clear that this meeting was going to test whether those ideas could actually survive contact with men like Dutch Schultz. Dutch didn't ease into his proposal. He didn't dress it up or soften the language. He leaned forward, eyes hard, voice sharp, and put his solution on the table. We kill him. No hesitation, no alternatives. Kill Thomas Dewey and end the problem permanently. Dutch laid it out like a business decision, a random mugging, a robbery gone wrong, one dead prosecutor, and the pressure disappeared. In his mind, it was clean, efficient, necessary. Around the table, the reaction was immediate and uncomfortable. Men shifted in their seats. Cigars paused mid-air. Killing a prosecutor wasn't like killing a rival boss or an informant. It was a declaration of war against the government itself. Everyone in that room understood the consequences, the kind of heat that never cooled down, the kind that destroyed entire organizations. Lucky Luciano let Dutch finish. Then he spoke, calmly, quietly, without emotion. He asked Dutch a simple question. What happens after? After the prosecutor is dead, after the headlines, after the public outrage? Lucky explained what Dutch refused to see. Killing Dewey wouldn't end the pressure. It would multiply it. More prosecutors, more agents, more attention than any of them could survive. It was the one line they could never cross. Meyer Lansky backed him up. So did others around the table. They weren't protecting Dewey. They were protecting themselves. The commission existed to prevent exactly this kind of reckless decision. Dutch wasn't convinced. To him, this wasn't caution. It was cowardice. He accused the others of hiding behind rules while he faced the real danger. Dewey wasn't building cases against them the way he was against Dutch. It was easy to vote no when your own freedom wasn't on the line. The room grew louder. Voices overlapped. Tension climbed. Lucky raised his hand, signaling for order. This wasn't personal. This was procedure. He called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing action against Thomas Dewey. Dutch's hand went up immediately. Fast, defiant. No one else moved. The silence stretched. Then, Lucky asked for those opposed. 11 hands rose together. Every man in the room except Dutch Schultz. The decision was final. Lucky stated it plainly. The commission would not sanction the hit. Dewey would not be touched. Dutch was advised to leave the jurisdiction, lay low, find another solution that didn't bring the government crashing down on all of them. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Dutch Schultz stood up. His chair scraped violently across the floor. His face flushed deep red, veins bulging in his neck. This wasn't just anger. This was wounded pride. Dutch felt exposed, isolated, outvoted, and worse, overruled. He cursed the commission, called the vote meaningless, accused Lucky of forgetting what this life was really built on. Blood, not ballots. Fear, not discussion. Lucky remained seated, calm, unmoved. He reminded Dutch that the vote was how things worked now. 11-1. Rules were rules. That was when Dutch's hand moved toward his jacket. Every man in the room felt it before they saw it. The shift in the air. The moment when words stopped mattering. When history narrowed to a single choice. The vote had ended the discussion. But it had just started something far more dangerous. Dutch Schultz didn't hesitate. His hand came out of his jacket holding a .45 automatic, the metal catching the light of the chandelier as he cocked it with a sharp, final click. He raised the gun and aimed it directly at Lucky Luciano's head. 3 feet away, point-blank range, no cover, no escape, no warning. The room went dead silent. Not the kind of silence where people stop talking, the kind where breathing feels too loud. 12 men sat frozen in place, every one of them armed, every one of them experienced enough to know exactly what this meant. Pulling a gun at a commission meeting wasn't just aggression, it was an unthinkable violation, a direct attack on the system itself. Dutch's finger rested on the trigger. His face was rigid, the rage that had fueled him moments earlier now sharpened into something colder. This wasn't a threat anymore. This was a decision waiting to happen. Lucky Luciano didn't move. He didn't reach for his own weapon. He didn't push back his chair. He didn't flinch. He sat exactly where he was, staring at Dutch with calm, calculating eyes. The same eyes that had survived assassination attempts. The same eyes that had dismantled the old Mafia order, piece by piece. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Meyer Lansky stayed seated, knowing that any sudden movement could turn this into a massacre. Then Lucky spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled, almost conversational. "You pull that trigger, Dutch," he said, "and you better kill every man in this room." Dutch's eyes flickered. Just for a second, Lucky continued, his tone steady, free of emotion. He explained what Dutch was refusing to accept. Killing Lucky wouldn't make him powerful. It would make him hunted. 11 families, 11 organizations, endless resources, endless time. Every man at that table would become his enemy. Even if Dutch survived the night, he wouldn't survive the aftermath. "You're not killing a boss," Lucky said. "You're killing the system." Meyer finally spoke, his voice firm but calm. He told Dutch to put the gun down, to think clearly, to understand there was no winning move left. Dutch tried to argue, but his voice cracked. He insisted Dewey would destroy them all. That Lucky was leading them off a cliff. But Lucky didn't argue back. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He let the logic do the work. "Kill the prosecutor. You lose. Kill me. You lose faster." The room stayed silent as Dutch processed it. The realization settled in slowly, painfully. Even if he pulled the trigger, even if Lucky died in that chair, Dutch Schultz was already finished. The rules he hated were now stronger than his gun. The .45 began to shake in his hand. Not from fear, from understanding. Seconds stretched into eternity. Every man in the room waited, knowing they were watching the future of organized crime hang on a single finger. Then, slowly, Dutch lowered the gun. He didn't holster it. He didn't apologize. He just let it hang at his side, heavy and useless. The rage drained from his face, replaced by something emptier, something defeated. "You're making a mistake," Dutch said quietly. "Maybe," Lucky replied, "but it's our mistake to make." Dutch looked around the room. 11 faces. 11 men who would follow the rules before they followed him. Men who would kill him without hesitation if he crossed the line again. Without another word, Dutch slipped the gun back into his jacket and turned toward the door. In that moment, The decision had been made. Not just about Lucky Luciano's life, but about how the Mafia would operate from that point forward. Guns no longer decided everything. Rules did. And that single sentence, spoken calmly in the face of death, saved Lucky Luciano and changed organized crime forever. Dutch Schultz walked out of the Waldorf Astoria suite alone. No allies, no support, no illusion left that he was still in control. The door closed behind him, and with it closed the last chapter of the old Mafia world he represented. He didn't know it yet, but that meeting had already sealed his fate, not because he pulled a gun on Lucky Luciano, but because he threatened something far bigger than any single man. He threatened the system. In the days that followed, the commission said nothing publicly. There were no announcements, no warnings, no official statements. That was how power worked now. Quiet, efficient, decided in rooms, not streets. Dutch Schultz had shown that he valued his pride over stability, his fear over order, and that made him dangerous. Not just to Lucky Luciano, but to every family represented at that table. 8 days later, Dutch Schultz was dead. He was gunned down in a Newark restaurant bathroom, shot multiple times by men who waited calmly for him to appear. There was no trial, no explanation, just the inevitable consequence of crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. The commission never officially claimed responsibility. They didn't have to. Everyone understood the message. No one man stood above the rules. What happened that night in the Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a dramatic confrontation. It was a transition of power. The final moment when the Mafia stopped being ruled by impulse and started being governed by structure. Before that meeting, violence was authority. Whoever was loudest, angriest, or most feared often got their way. After that meeting, authority came from agreement, from votes, from a shared understanding that survival depended on restraint. Lucky Luciano didn't win because he was stronger than Dutch Schultz. He won because he was smarter. He understood that the future of organized crime couldn't survive endless wars and reckless decisions. It needed rules. It needed boundaries. It needed a system that protected the whole, not just the ego of one man. That night proved the commission wasn't symbolic. It was real. It had teeth, and it would enforce its decisions, no matter how powerful the person who challenged them happened to be. For Lucky Luciano, the moment wasn't about personal victory, it was about validation. The system he had built held under the most extreme pressure imaginable. A gun aimed at his head, death 3 feet away, and still, the rules survived. That was the birth of Mafia law. From that point forward, organized crime in America operated differently. Fewer public wars, more behind-the-scenes negotiations. Violence became controlled, calculated, and purposeful. The Mafia became quieter, more disciplined, and far more dangerous. Not because it killed more often, but because it killed less impulsively. Even when Lucky himself went to prison not long after, the system didn't collapse. The commission continued to function. Decisions were made. Disputes were settled. The organization proved it was bigger than any single man, including its architect. That was Lucky Luciano's greatest achievement. The night Dutch Schultz pointed a .45 at his head is remembered not for the gun, but for what stopped it. Logic, restraint, and the understanding that true power doesn't come from pulling the trigger. It comes from creating rules so strong that no one dares to. That night, the Mafia grew up, and the men who couldn't accept that future didn't survive it.